Racism, of course, is starting to become a problem in this country. I was doing some research, found out one of my family members used to own slaves. I couldn't believe it. My own brother.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, February the 28th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, motivation, meditation, and the Mossad. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, and now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Credit and sound money. What is fundamental to economic theory is that there is no constant relation between changes in the quantity of money and in prices. Changes in the supply of money affect individual prices and wages in different ways. The metaphor of the term price level is misleading. Ludwig von Mises. There is no such thing as an aggregate price level, and if there were, by the time you calculated such, it would have changed a nanosecond later, with no quantitative way to determine why. Variable relationships exist in the economy that defy reason to try and measure or handicap. Why is this important? Because some of the great monetary monstrosities of all time have been committed trying to manage or control something, the price level, that doesn't even exist, let alone subject itself to management or control.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you, and now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 28. For radicals, the issue is never the real issue. Don't be fooled. Whatever it happens to be, radicals' talking point du jour is invariably a mere ruse aimed at achieving a darker, more nefarious, more strategic, long-term goal. Mod cons often make the mistake of engaging radicals on the substance of their talking points, as if radicals are advocating for or against a given policy in good faith. But this is folly. The talking points of radicals, their issues of the day, are always mere Trojan horses for accomplishing a deeper agenda. When radicals take up the mantle of a given issue, it's as an avenue for pursuing something far more profound. So, you'll never be able to get a hardened radical to abandon his endorsement of, let's say, expansive firearms restrictions, even if you offer irrefutable proof that crime rates are lower and murders are fewer in areas where legal gun carriage proliferates. The issue for the radical was never truly an intolerable level of violent crimes. That was all a decoy, a convenient setting for emotive lip service aimed at providing the justification for a reimagined society. Mod cons would be well served to understand, for example, that the debate over gun control isn't about reducing deaths. It's about making people more dependent on government by depriving them of self-sufficiency. Likewise, the debate over abortion isn't about a woman's right to choose. It's about freeing women from the home by enabling women's careerism. The debate over unfettered immigration isn't about relieving the world's poor, tired, huddled masses. It's about ushering in globalism and undermining the sovereignty of the nation-state. The debate over raising taxes isn't really about balancing the budget. It's about income redistribution. The debate over climate change isn't really about protecting the environment. It's about handicapping the economies of first world nations so that third world nations can achieve parity of wealth. The debate over gay marriage isn't about equality of rights. It's about debasing and undermining matrimony and the family, which are viewed as patriarchal and oppressive. The debate about trans rights isn't about respecting human dignity. It's about undermining the moral order and crushing sexual taboos. The true believers, those wonks who become embroiled on the radical side of the foregoing fights, fail to comprehend that they are mere pawns in a larger game that is being played by cleverer people. If you don't know whether or not you're a pawn, then you're a pawn. On a meta level, what radicals are really pursuing is a humanist utopia, a world without borders, class distinction, sex distinction, and wealth inequality, a world where each man is free to live out his unique artistic identity, doing as he pleases, unshackled from arbitrary constraints placed upon him by a domineering ruling class. It's a subjectivist, existentialist vision wherein each man can make of himself what he wills, serving not God, but his own whims, and thereby ostensibly the community. Till this ultimate stage of the radical vision is achieved, the state must be grown and empowered so that it can be used as a bludgeon to implement the unnatural policies that will ensure the attainment of the longed-for utopia. But out of fear of backlash, radicals have to scheme to bring about their new order in secret. They can't broadcast what they plan to do because it would prove fatally unpopular. So they have to implement their grand vision piecemeal, never tipping their hand till all becomes clear in one phonic denouement. Be reminded that the radical vision is an inherently godless vision, one that must be heartily rebuffed by the retrograde. Efficient causes, creators, imbue their creations with final cause, with purpose. Since God is our creator, we cannot choose our own purposes in life. To decide man's purpose is God's unique privilege, and he has decreed, once and for all, that our purpose is to know, love, and serve him. Living life outside of these parameters leads only to misery and ruination. That said, we need to attack the radical vision in its unmasked form. There is no use debating an endless litany of decoy issues with radicals, except to temporarily stave off an attack. Rather, we need to attack the philosophical errors that are at the core of radicals' doctrine. Becoming bogged down in the morass of policy minutiae with radicals is a fool's errand, since their mania for the utopian state moves them to ignore the illogic of the many planks of their platform, just as the tail wags the dog.
And that was Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon, and that was Rule 28. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now this is Maria Bartiromo on Saturday, and she's going to introduce a clip of J.D. Vance, who makes a mistake, but it's, well, listen.
Quickly to turn that primetime moment into political momentum. Vice President J.D. Vance also on the road, reinforcing Trump's messaging at a manufacturing facility in Wisconsin.
Hearing the Democrats talk about affordability is like hearing an arsonist complain about fire. You left us a United States of America where the average family was $3,000 poorer. So our attitude is, you know what? When you talk about affordability, you're exactly right. You caused an affordability problem, congressional Democrats, and we are here to fix it.
There we go. So this is why nobody's ever held accountable. You hear conservatives every day complaining on talk radio about why is no one held accountable? This is why. The liberals screw things up, the liberals create chaos, and the conservatives come in to save the day. They save not America, they save the liberals. They come in and they clean up the chaos, clean up the mess, and then freeing up the liberals to go back out when they're in power again, to go out and make more of a mess, more chaos. And this is the cycle. It goes on and on. It's been going on for 50 years or more. And the left has counted on it. My question is, why? Why do that? What would happen if we said, hey, liberals, your problem, you created it, you fix it? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little motivation.
Creating life on your terms, like deciding what are the immutables. It's like, if you want to take the island, you've got to burn your boats. If you have a way to go back, the mind will rationalize and you will go back. But if you really are committed to a greater quality of life, you have to have something you value more than your present way of doing things. Like, you wake up every day and you know that life is a gift and you want to give back even more. When I say to people, you want your life to keep growing, keep putting yourself in new environments. Keep getting around things you're not used to and let something hit you. And like, people don't know their passions because they keep going and doing the same things. It's like, get around where it's better and see what hits you. For things to change, you got to change. For things to get better, you got to get better, right? It's The story is the belief you've told yourself over and over, because belief is the invisible force that controls everything in your life. And when you have a belief that you've honed because you're fearful and you've never done this before, then I can show you exactly how to do it, and you'll say it doesn't work, I've tried that. Yeah, how many times, how hard, how many minutes, right? But what's behind the story is your state, your mental, emotional state. If I said to you, I am going to lose 12 pounds in the next 6 weeks, there is non-negotiable. Here's what I'm going to do, this and this and this and this. Do you think I'm going to do it? Yes. You bet your ass I'm going to do it, right? You can feel the state. Because I believe there's 3 decisions you make every moment of your life. You're making them right now if you're listening to me, and so is your audience. The first one is, what are you going to focus on? You're going to be focused on what happened yesterday, what you're going to have for lunch, what I'm saying, how it relates to you. There are millions of things you can focus on. But you don't experience life. You experience the life you focus on. And most of us are distortion, deletion creatures. Our brains don't take it all in consciously. It's too much. So our brains delete things. We distort things. We generalize things so we can make it through our lives. And so if you don't control your focus, you react. And the minute you focus on something, your brain has to figure out, what does this mean? Is this the end of the beginning? Is this person dissing me? Are they challenging me? Are they coaching me? Are they loving me? And whatever meaning you give it produces emotion. And out of that emotion, you make the third decision, what am I going to do?
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little meditation. And that was a little meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Mossad.
November 17th, 1983. A black Mercedes rolled through the rain-slicked streets of Geneva, carrying one of Egypt's most protected men. General Mahmoud Safwat had survived 3 assassination attempts, built a network of agents across the Middle East, and knew secrets that could destabilize governments. He believed Switzerland was neutral ground, a place where even enemies observed certain rules. He was wrong. Within the hour, he would vanish from a 5-star hotel without a trace. And Egypt's intelligence service would spend the next 48 hours pretending nothing had happened. The Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva stood like a monument to discretion, its marble lobby hosting diplomats, arms dealers, and intelligence officers who pretended not to recognize each other. November rain streaked the tall windows as guests moved through the elegant space, their conversations muffled by thick carpets and the soft clink of crystal from the adjacent bar. Outside, the city hummed with its usual precision. Swiss punctuality governing everything from the trams to the street cleaners who worked even in the downpour. General Mahmoud Safwat arrived at 7:15 in the evening, flanked by 2 bodyguards whose bulk barely fit through the revolving door. At 54 years old, the general carried himself with the stiff posture of a career military man, though his tailored civilian suit suggested someone who had learned to navigate worlds beyond the barracks. His face was broad, marked by a thick mustache that had gone gray at the edges, and his eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, studying faces, measuring threats. He had earned this paranoia. As the deputy director of Egypt's General Intelligence Directorate, known as the Mukhabarat, Safwat oversaw operations that stretched from Libya to Lebanon. He had built networks of informants in Palestinian refugee camps. He had cultivated assets within rival Arab intelligence services. And most dangerously, he maintained connections with Soviet advisors who still lingered in Cairo, despite Egypt's pivot toward the west following the Camp David Accords. The peace treaty with Israel, signed 4 years earlier, had not ended the shadow war between the two nations. Egyptian intelligence continued to monitor Israeli activities throughout the region. Israeli intelligence returned the attention with equal fervor. Both sides maintained the polite fiction that they were now allies, while their operatives continued probing for weaknesses, stealing secrets, and occasionally eliminating threats. Safwat had come to Geneva for a meeting that did not officially exist. A Syrian intermediary had arranged contact with representatives of a European arms consortium interested in supplying equipment that Egypt could not purchase openly. The Americans monitored such transactions closely, and Cairo had learned to conduct sensitive business through neutral channels. Switzerland, with its tradition of banking secrecy and diplomatic discretion, provided the perfect venue. What Safwat did not know was that the meeting had been arranged not by Syrians but by Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service. The intermediary who had contacted Cairo was an asset who had been feeding information to Tel Aviv for nearly a decade. Every detail of the general's itinerary, from his flight number to his hotel room, had been transmitted to a team that had arrived in Geneva 3 days earlier. The operation had been authorized at the highest levels. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir had personally reviewed the plan, weighing the diplomatic consequences against the intelligence value of what Safwat might reveal. The general was believed to possess detailed knowledge of Egyptian military capabilities, Soviet weapons systems still in Egyptian hands, and most importantly, the names and locations of Mukhabarat assets operating inside Israel. This last category had become urgent. In the previous 18 months, 3 Israeli intelligence operations had been compromised by leaks that suggested penetration at high levels. Safwat, according to Mossad analysts, might hold the key to identifying the source. The team leader was a man known within the organization only by his operational name, David. At 41, he had spent nearly 2 decades in the field, running operations from Beirut to Buenos Aires. His appearance was deliberately unremarkable. Medium height, brown hair going gray, features that could pass for European, Arab, or Latin American, depending on the context. He spoke 6 languages with varying degrees of fluency and possessed the rare ability to remain calm under conditions that would paralyze most men. David had arrived in Geneva on November 14th, traveling on a Canadian passport that identified him as a businessman in the telecommunications sector. He checked into a modest hotel near the train station, unpacked a single suitcase containing unremarkable clothing, and spent the first 2 days conducting surveillance of the Intercontinental and its surroundings. He noted the positions of security cameras, the schedules of doormen and cleaning staff, the patterns of traffic on the surrounding streets. By the time his team assembled, he knew the terrain as intimately as any local resident. The team consisted of 8 operatives, each assigned a specific role. 2 would handle logistics, maintaining vehicles and safe houses. 2 would provide surveillance, tracking Safwat's movements from the moment he left the airport. 2 would serve as backup, ready to intervene if complications arose. And 2 would execute the actual extraction, subduing the general and transporting him to a location where interrogation could begin. The extraction specialists were a man and a woman who had worked together on previous operations. Yosef was built like a wrestler, with hands that could crush a windpipe or apply a chokehold with equal precision. He had served in an elite military unit before joining Mossad, and had been involved in operations that remained classified even within the organization. His partner, whom the team called Miriam, appeared to be his opposite, slender, elegant, with dark hair styled in a manner that suggested European sophistication. She carried herself like a diplomat's wife or a gallery owner, the sort of woman who attracted attention without seeming dangerous. This appearance concealed training in hand-to-hand combat, pharmacology, and the art of appearing exactly where she was not expected. The plan called for intercepting Safwat in his hotel room, where he would be isolated from his bodyguards. Egyptian security protocols required the guards to maintain positions in the corridor rather than inside the room itself, a vulnerability that David intended to exploit. The team would gain access to the room through a combination of electronic manipulation and social engineering, subdue the general using a fast-acting sedative, and transport him through a service entrance to a waiting vehicle. The entire operation, from entry to departure, was designed to take no more than 12 minutes. The preparation had been meticulous. Mossad technicians in Tel Aviv had constructed a duplicate of the electronic lock system used by the Intercontinental, practicing until they could bypass it in under 30 seconds. They had obtained samples of the sedative that would be used, testing dosages on volunteers to ensure effectiveness without risking cardiac arrest. They had studied floor plans, interviewed former employees, and analyzed the hotel's security protocols until they understood the system better than the guards who operated it. On the afternoon of November 17th, the team conducted a final rehearsal in a warehouse on the outskirts of Geneva. They had constructed a mock-up of the hotel corridor and room, complete with furniture positioned according to intelligence photographs. Each operative walked through their role multiple times, anticipating complications and practicing responses. David watched from the side, noting hesitations and suggesting adjustments. By the time they finished, every movement had been refined to mechanical precision. The rain began falling around 5 in the afternoon, a development that David welcomed. Pedestrians would hurry past with umbrellas raised, paying little attention to vehicles or loiterers. Security cameras would capture blurred images through water-streaked lenses. The weather, he reflected, was cooperating with the operation. At 6:45, the surveillance team reported that Safwat's motorcade had departed the Egyptian diplomatic mission and was proceeding toward the hotel. David acknowledged the transmission and signaled his team to take positions. 2 operatives in a gray Peugeot parked near the hotel's service entrance. 2 more entered the lobby, dressed as European businessmen returning from a late meeting. Yosef and Miriam waited in a room on the 4th floor, 1 level below Safwat's suite, ready to move the moment they received the signal. The general's arrival at the hotel proceeded according to expectations. His bodyguards swept the lobby, their eyes moving across faces with professional suspicion. They noticed the 2 businessmen at the bar, but dismissed them as harmless. They did not notice the woman reading a magazine near the elevators, nor the man adjusting his umbrella by the front entrance. These operatives had been trained to appear invisible, and they performed their roles flawlessly. Safwat proceeded to the 5th floor, accompanied by both bodyguards. The elevator doors opened onto a carpeted corridor lit by brass sconces, its walls decorated with reproductions of alpine landscapes. The general walked to room 517, inserted his key card, and entered. 1 bodyguard took a position outside the door, while the other stationed himself near the elevator bank. Both assumed the alert posture of men who expected trouble, but did not anticipate it arriving tonight. In the room directly below, Yosef checked his equipment 1 final time. The sedative was loaded in a pneumatic injector that could deliver its payload through clothing. The electronic bypass device had been tested and confirmed functional. Miriam adjusted her appearance in the mirror, transforming herself from surveillance operative to hotel staff member. She wore a uniform obtained through channels that David preferred not to discuss. Complete with name tag and the slightly harried expression of someone working a double shift. At 7:42, David transmitted the signal to proceed. Miriam emerged from the stairwell, carrying a tray with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She approached the bodyguard outside Safwat's room with a smile that suggested pleasant fatigue. "Complimentary service from the management," she said in French, presenting the tray. "For Monsieur Hassan." She used the alias under which Safwat had registered, demonstrating knowledge that only hotel staff would possess. The bodyguard hesitated. His training warned against unexpected deliveries, but the woman before him showed no signs of threat. Her hands were visible, occupied with the tray. Her uniform was genuine, and the wine, a respectable Bordeaux, was exactly the sort of gesture a luxury hotel might extend to a valued guest. He knocked on the door and spoke briefly with Safwat in Arabic. A moment later, the door opened. The general stood in the entrance wearing a hotel bathrobe, his face suggesting mild irritation at the interruption. He had been preparing for his meeting, which was scheduled for 9 o'clock in a private dining room. The wine, he assumed, was an attempt by the hotel to impress a guest whose reservation had been made through diplomatic channels. Miriam stepped inside, placing the tray on a table near the window. As Safwat turned to close the door, she moved with practiced efficiency. Her left hand retrieved the pneumatic injector from beneath the napkin on the tray. Her right hand grasped Safwat's wrist, spinning him off balance. Before he could cry out, the injector pressed against his neck and delivered its payload. The sedative took effect within seconds. Safwat's legs buckled, his eyes rolling upward as consciousness fled. Miriam caught him before he could fall, lowering him to the carpet with the care of a nurse attending a patient. The entire sequence had taken less than 8 seconds. In the corridor, Yosef had emerged from the stairwell behind the bodyguard. The man sensed movement and began to turn, his hand reaching for the weapon beneath his jacket. He never completed the motion. Yosef's arm wrapped around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery with precisely calibrated force. Within 5 seconds, the bodyguard was unconscious. Yosef lowered him to the floor and dragged him into the room, where Miriam was already binding Safwat's wrists with plastic restraints. The second bodyguard near the elevator presented a more complex problem. He had heard nothing, seen nothing, but his training demanded periodic visual confirmation of his colleague's position. When he turned and found the corridor empty, his hand moved immediately to his weapon. He never drew it. The 2 operatives who had been waiting in the lobby had ascended via the service stairs. They emerged behind him, one applying a chokehold, while the other administered a sedative injection. The bodyguard struggled briefly before succumbing. They carried him to the room, adding him to the collection of unconscious men. David's voice crackled through the earpieces. "Status report. Package secured," Miriam responded. 3 subjects neutralized. Proceeding to extraction. The team moved with choreographed precision. Safwat was placed in a laundry cart obtained from the housekeeping closet, covered with sheets that concealed his bound form. The bodyguards were positioned in the bathroom, where they would not be discovered until morning. The wine bottle and glasses were wiped clean and left on the table, suggesting that the general had enjoyed a drink before retiring. Yosef pushed the cart toward the service elevator, his uniform identifying him as maintenance staff, responding to a plumbing emergency. Miriam walked ahead, clearing the path and ensuring that no witnesses would complicate the extraction. They descended to the basement level, where the service entrance opened onto a loading dock concealed from the main street. The gray Peugeot waited with its engine running. Within 90 seconds, Safwat had been transferred from the cart to the vehicle's trunk, where padding and ventilation had been installed to ensure his survival during transport. The cart was abandoned in a storage room, where it might go unnoticed for days. By the time the elevator doors closed, no trace of the operation remained visible. David watched the Peugeot depart from his position across the street, then walked calmly toward the train station. His role in the operation was complete. The interrogation phase would be handled by specialists who were already waiting at a safe house in the French countryside, just across the border. He would return to Tel Aviv on a commercial flight the following morning, traveling on a different passport than the one he had used to enter Switzerland. The drive to the safe house took approximately 2 hours, following a route that avoided major highways and border checkpoints. The crossing into France was accomplished through a rural road that local smugglers had used for generations, its existence unknown to authorities on either side. By midnight, Safwat had been installed in a basement room equipped with medical monitoring equipment and soundproofing that ensured complete isolation. He regained consciousness slowly, the sedative releasing its grip in stages. His first awareness was of discomfort. His wrists were bound to the arms of a metal chair, his ankles secured to its legs. The room was lit by a single bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across concrete walls bare of any decoration. He was still wearing the hotel bathrobe, a detail that somehow made his situation feel more humiliating. A man sat across from him, positioned just beyond the pool of light. Safwat could make out the general outline of a figure, but features remained obscured. When the man spoke, his Arabic carried the accent of someone who had learned the language academically rather than natively. "General Safwat," the voice said. "Welcome. I apologize for the accommodations. They are temporary, I assure you." Safwat tested his restraints, found them unyielding, and forced himself to remain calm. His training had prepared him for this possibility, though he had never truly believed it would occur. Egyptian intelligence officers were not supposed to be kidnapped from neutral countries. There were protocols, understandings between services, rules that even enemies observed. "You are making a serious mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that coiled in his stomach. "Egypt will not permit this. There will be consequences." The figure in the shadows shifted slightly. "Egypt will not acknowledge that anything has occurred. Your government cannot admit that one of its senior intelligence officers was taken from a hotel in Geneva. The diplomatic embarrassment would be intolerable. They will claim you defected, or perhaps that you never existed at all. Either way, no one is coming to rescue you." The interrogation that followed would last for 11 days. The techniques employed were sophisticated, combining psychological pressure with carefully calibrated physical discomfort. Sleep deprivation was the primary tool, augmented by temperature manipulation and the constant uncertainty about what would happen next. Safwat was permitted to eat and drink, but never on a predictable schedule. He was allowed to rest, but never for more than an hour at a time. The questioning continued in shifts, with different interrogators appearing at random intervals to ask the same questions from different angles. The interrogators sought specific information. They wanted names of Mukhabarat assets operating in Israel, particularly any who might have penetrated Israeli intelligence or military circles. They wanted details about Egyptian military capabilities, force dispositions, and contingency plans for various scenarios. They wanted information about Soviet weapon systems that remained in Egyptian arsenals, their maintenance status and operational readiness, and they wanted to understand the relationship between Egyptian intelligence and other Arab services, particularly those of Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Safwat resisted initially, providing only his name, rank, and the assertion that his captivity violated international law. The interrogators listened patiently, acknowledged his position, and continued their work. They showed him photographs of his family, not as threats, but as reminders of what he had to lose. They played recordings of intercepted communications that demonstrated the depth of Israeli intelligence penetration. They offered him water, coffee, and eventually meals that exceeded what he might have received in a military prison. The breakthrough came on the 6th day, when fatigue and isolation had worn down his psychological defenses. One of the interrogators, a woman whose gentle manner contrasted with the harshness of the environment, began asking about a specific operation that Safwat had believed was known only to a handful of Egyptian officials. The operation involved the placement of an asset within the Israeli defense establishment, someone who had been feeding information to Cairo for nearly 3 years. When the interrogator mentioned the code name of this asset, Safwat understood that resistance was futile. The Israelis already knew more than he had imagined possible. His silence would not protect anyone. His continued defiance would only prolong his suffering without serving any purpose. Over the following days, he provided information that would reshape Israeli counterintelligence operations for years to come. He revealed the identity of the penetration agent, a clerical worker in the defense ministry, who had been passing documents through a complex chain of intermediaries. He detailed Egyptian surveillance operations directed at Israeli diplomatic facilities throughout Europe and the Middle East. He explained the structure of mukhabarat networks in Palestinian refugee camps, identifying key assets and communication protocols. The interrogators recorded everything, verifying details against existing intelligence and pressing for clarification when his answers seemed incomplete. They treated him with professional courtesy, never resorting to the brutality that he had expected. This approach, he would later reflect, was more effective than violence would have been. They had not broken him through pain, but through the systematic demonstration that his secrets were already compromised. On the 11th day, they informed him that the interrogation was complete. He would be released, they explained, through a channel that would allow both sides to maintain their preferred fictions. Egypt would receive him back without acknowledging that anything unusual had occurred. Israel would retain the intelligence he had provided without revealing how it had been obtained. The shadow war would continue as before, with one significant difference. Cairo would know that its most senior intelligence officers could be taken at will, and this knowledge would influence Egyptian operations for years to come. The release was arranged through intermediaries in Cyprus, a location chosen for its accessibility and its tradition of hosting sensitive exchanges between hostile parties. Safwat was driven to Geneva Airport, where he boarded a commercial flight to Larnaca under the surveillance of Mossad operatives who ensured his departure without incident. In Cyprus, Egyptian officials collected him from a hotel near the waterfront, asking no questions about where he had been or what had occurred. The official Egyptian response was silence. No diplomatic protests were filed. No public statements were issued. The intelligence services of both nations continued their work as though the incident had never happened. Within Egypt, Safwat was quietly retired, his career ending not in disgrace, but in the ambiguous category of officers who had been removed from sensitive positions for unspecified reasons. He lived out his remaining years in Cairo, avoided by former colleagues, and watched by security services that never fully trusted him again. For Mossad, the operation was considered a significant success. The intelligence obtained from Safwat led to the identification and neutralization of the penetration agent in the defense ministry, closing a leak that had compromised multiple operations. The techniques employed in Geneva, particularly the combination of technical surveillance and human manipulation, were refined and applied to subsequent operations. The willingness to conduct an extraction in a neutral country demonstrated capabilities that influenced the calculations of rival services for decades. The diplomatic consequences were minimal, as David had predicted. Switzerland filed no formal complaints, having no evidence that anything untoward had occurred on its territory. Egypt could not acknowledge the incident without admitting that its intelligence services had been penetrated and its senior officer kidnapped. Israel maintained its silence, adding the operation to the classified files that documented its covert capabilities. Within the intelligence community, however, word spread through unofficial channels. The story of how Mossad had taken an Egyptian general from a Geneva hotel became part of the mythology that surrounded Israeli intelligence, a reminder that even the most protected individuals could be reached when circumstances demanded. Other services studied the operation, some with admiration and others with concern, understanding that the rules of the Shadow War had shifted slightly. The team that had executed the extraction dispersed to other assignments. David continued his career, rising to senior positions before retiring in the late 1990s. Joseph and Miriam worked together on subsequent operations, their partnership becoming legendary within the organization. The support operatives moved through the invisible bureaucracy of intelligence work, their contributions known only to those with appropriate clearances. The safe house in France was sanitized and abandoned, its basement room restored to an innocent state that revealed nothing of what had occurred there. The vehicles used in the operation were sold or destroyed. The documents and recordings from the interrogation were transported to Tel Aviv, where analysts extracted every fragment of useful information before consigning the originals to archives that would remain classified for generations. General Mahmoud Safwat died in 1997. His passing noted only briefly in Egyptian newspapers that described him as a retired military officer, without mentioning his intelligence career. His family received a pension appropriate to his rank and years of service. His colleagues attended a funeral that was modest by the standards of Egyptian military tradition, their presence a gesture of respect for a man whose greatest significance could never be publicly acknowledged. The rain that had fallen on Geneva that November evening had long since evaporated, leaving no trace on the streets where the operation had unfolded. The Intercontinental Hotel continued to host diplomats and businessmen who never suspected what had occurred in room 517. The service corridors and loading docks that had facilitated the extraction were used daily by staff who knew nothing of their role in history. In Tel Aviv, the files on Operation Geneva remained in secure storage, accessible only to those with the highest clearances. Occasionally, senior officers would retrieve them for training purposes, using the operation as a case study in planning, execution, and the management of diplomatic consequences. New recruits would study the details, learning lessons that could not be taught in any academic setting. The shadow war between nations continued, fought by men and women whose names would never appear in history books. They operated in the spaces between official reality and hidden truth, conducting operations that governments would neither confirm nor deny. The extraction of General Safwat was merely one episode in this endless conflict, notable for its audacity, but ultimately one among many. What distinguished the operation was not its complexity or its violence, but its demonstration of a fundamental truth about intelligence work. In the world of espionage, neutral ground did not exist. There were no safe spaces, no guarantees, no rules that could not be broken when stakes were sufficiently high. The general had believed himself protected by diplomatic convention and geographic distance. He had trusted that certain boundaries would be respected. That trust had been his vulnerability, and Mossad had exploited it with clinical precision. The lesson was not lost on other intelligence services. In the years that followed, senior officers traveling abroad took additional precautions, varying their routines, expanding their security details, avoiding hotels where their movements could be predicted. These measures provided some protection, but they could not eliminate the fundamental vulnerability that the Geneva operation had exposed. In a world where technology enabled surveillance and communication in ways that previous generations could not have imagined, no one was truly beyond reach. For those who had participated in the operation, the memories remained vivid even decades later. The tension of the final approach, the precision of the extraction, the long drive through rain-soaked countryside to the French border. These moments had defined their careers, establishing reputations that would follow them through subsequent assignments. They had proven that Mossad could operate anywhere, against any target, with consequences that the international community would be forced to accept. The operation also demonstrated something about the nature of intelligence work that outsiders rarely understood. Success was measured not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet achievements that left no visible trace. The best operations were those that never made headlines, that remained classified for generations, that achieved their objectives without alerting the world to what had occurred. By this standard, Geneva was exemplary. The rain had stopped by the time David reached the train station that evening, but the streets remained slick with moisture that reflected the lights of passing cars. He purchased a ticket to Zurich, where he would spend the night before catching his flight to Tel Aviv. The platform was nearly empty at that hour. occupied only by a few travelers who paid no attention to the unremarkable man in the gray overcoat. As the train pulled away from Geneva, David allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The operation had proceeded exactly as planned, with no casualties and no complications. The general was in custody, the team was dispersing, and the intelligence that would justify the entire enterprise was already being extracted. By the time the sun rose, Safwat would have begun his long journey through revelation and capitulation. The Swiss countryside passed outside the window, its darkness broken only by occasional clusters of light that marked villages and farms. David watched without seeing, his mind already turning to the next operation, the next target, the next invisible war that would be fought in shadows while the world went about its business unaware. This was his life, had been his life for 2 decades, and he could imagine no other. In a basement room across the border, General Safwat was beginning to understand that his world had changed forever. The questions that would eventually break his resistance had not yet begun, but their inevitability was already apparent. He was alone, isolated, cut off from every support system he had spent his career constructing. The empire of secrets he had built was about to be dismantled, piece by piece, by men who asked patient questions and never raised their voices. The Geneva operation remained classified for decades, its details known only to those who had participated and the senior officials who had authorized it. No diplomatic protests were ever filed. No newspaper ever reported what had occurred. General Safwat lived out his remaining years in quiet obscurity, and the secrets he had revealed continued to influence Israeli intelligence operations long after the Cold War ended.
And that was the Mossad. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.